Some wounds never heal. For Jebediah Walsh, that wound was the size of a daughter's grave. He was a giant of a man, carved from the harsh Wyoming territory, with shoulders as broad as a barn door, and hands that knew nothing but hard work and harder fights. For years he'd been running from his past, a ghost on the open plains with nothing but a worn-out Bible and a heart full of regret. Then he found her. A small bundle of rags, huddled beside the wreckage of a burned-out wagon train. A girl, no older than 12, with eyes as green as bottle glass and a sadness in them that no child should ever know. She was the only survivor of a massacre that had left 11 people dead and 7 wagons reduced to charred skeletons. Jebediah had lost his own daughter, Hope, to the frontier's unforgiving nature. And looking into this girl's frightened eyes, he saw something he thought he'd lost forever. A second chance. He couldn't ride away. He just couldn't. This girl had no name, no family left alive. Jebediah had nothing but an empty wagon and a soul weighed down by ghosts. He didn't know it yet, but these 2 broken people were about to try and save each other. But the frontier doesn't forgive, and the shadows following this girl were darker and more dangerous than he could ever imagine. His act of mercy wasn't just a second chance. It might be their doom. The Wyoming territory was a cruel canvas, painted in endless shades of gold and brown, a place that tested a man's soul every single day. Jebediah Walsh had been riding its trails for 15 years, long enough to read the whisper of the wind and the moods of the land. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with gray streaking his dark beard and lines etched around his pale blue eyes. Those eyes told the real story. They were haunted. Tucked in his saddlebag was a leather-bound Bible, worn thin from the hands of his father, a preacher who believed every soul could find redemption. Jebediah carried that book everywhere, through his years as an Army scout, through a brief, bloody stint wearing a sheriff's badge down in Texas, and now, through these wandering days where faith felt like a distant memory. "Trust in the Lord," his father used to say. But all Jebediah had left was his own understanding, and that wasn't worth much when the nightmares came. The smoke from the wagon train had been visible for miles, a black stain against the blue sky. Raiders, he'd thought at first. Comanche, maybe. Or just desperate men. He'd found the bodies scattered like broken dolls across the prairie. Men and women who'd carried all their hopes west, only to find their end in this God-forsaken dust. He buried them all, one by one, reading passages from his father's Bible over each shallow grave. It was the least he could do. It was on the second day of sifting through the wreckage that he found her. Huddled beneath an overturned water barrel, so still he thought she was another casualty. But then he saw it. The slight rise and fall of her chest. The way her small fingers clutched a silver locket to her heart. She was alive. Her dress was torn and stained with blood, some of it her own from a nasty gash on her forehead. Her hair, the color of wheat, was matted and tangled. But when her eyes opened, they stopped him cold. So much loss in one small person. "Easy now," he whispered, his voice rough but gentle. "You're safe." She didn't speak. Not a single word on the 6-hour ride to Cedar Falls. Cedar Falls wasn't much more than a muddy street and a handful of weathered buildings, but it had a general store, a saloon, and most importantly, it had Doc Henley. The old physician was past 70, but his hands were steady enough to stitch a man up or set a broken bone. "She's been through hell, Jeb," Doc Henley said, his face grim as he cleaned the girl's wounds. "Dehydrated, malnourished, but she'll live, thanks to you." Sheriff Thomas Murdoch arrived soon after, his heavy boots announcing his presence long before he filled the doorway. Murdoch was a good man, honest and fair, but the lawless territory had taken its toll on him. "Heard you brought in a survivor," he said, his eyes full of worry. "Any idea who she is?" Jebediah shook his head. "She hasn't spoken a word. Well, we'll need to find her people. Can't just. She's staying with me, Jebediah interrupted, surprising even himself with the steel in his voice. Until she's well enough to tell us what happened. The sheriff studied him with those shrewd brown eyes. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew about Jebediah's wife and daughter, taken by cholera years ago. They knew he'd been running ever since. The sheriff saw the look in Jebediah's eyes, a look he hadn't seen in a long, long time. Purpose. He just nodded. All right, Jeb. She's your responsibility. For 3 days, the girl barely moved from the bed in the room Jebediah rented above the saloon. She drank the water he offered, ate the broth, but her eyes remained distant, lost in a place he couldn't reach. He watched her sleep, the way she clutched that silver locket, and it was like watching a ghost. His own daughter, Hope, used to cling to her doll just like that during thunderstorms. Hope had been 8 when she died, old enough to know she was leaving, but young enough to believe her papa could stop it. He couldn't save Hope. He couldn't save his wife, Catherine. He couldn't even save himself from the grief that followed him like a shadow. But maybe, just maybe, he could save this one. Maybe this was God's own strange providence, offering him one last chance to be the protector he had failed to be. As the sun set on the 3rd day, she finally spoke. Her voice was a bare whisper in the dusty room. They're all dead. Jebediah put down his father's Bible. He looked up and saw her watching him, her eyes finally focused, finally present. Yes, he said gently. I'm sorry, I buried them proper. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. Mama told me to hide, she whispered. Told me to be quiet no matter what I heard. You did right. She saved your life. I want to remember her voice, the girl said, her own voice cracking. But it's getting harder. He moved to the chair beside her bed, his large frame moving with a quiet care he reserved for spooked animals. What was her name? Your mother. Elizabeth. Elizabeth Ann Morrison. The name seemed to give her strength. She used to sing to me. Amazing Grace. The girl sat up slowly, wincing. She looked at him, her gaze direct and piercing, and asked a question that hit him like a physical blow. Are you going to keep me? The simple words held the weight of a child's entire world. He thought of Hope, of all the promises he'd made and broken. He looked at this fragile survivor and knew he couldn't fail again. If you'll have me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I know I'm not much to look at, but I promise you this. No one will ever hurt you again while I draw breath. For the first time, a flicker of something other than pain appeared in her green eyes. What should I call you? Jebediah, or Jeb. She paused, her hand going to the locket at her throat. I think I want a new name. The old one belongs to who I was before. He understood. Sometimes you had to shed your past like a snake sheds its skin. What name feels right? She thought for a long moment, her face serious. Mercy, she said finally. I'd like to be called Mercy. Mercy Morrison, Jebediah said, testing the sound. That's a fine name. Will you teach me things? She asked, a hint of eagerness in her voice. How to ride a horse, how to read better. I'll teach you everything I know, he promised, and probably a few things I shouldn't. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, transforming her face. When can we leave this place? Soon as you're strong enough. Where will we go? Anywhere that's not here, she said, and he heard the echo of his own restless soul in her words. For tonight, they were safe. He had a purpose again. He wasn't just a broken man running from ghosts. He was a protector. A guardian. Jeb? Mercy's voice was drowsy. What is it, child? Thank you, she whispered, for not leaving me there. He looked at the small girl, finally asleep, and his own words were barely a breath in the quiet room. Thank you, he replied, for giving me a reason to stay. but peace on the frontier is a fleeting thing. And trouble was riding their way. 3 strangers rode into Cedar Falls on a Tuesday morning. Jebediah saw them from the saloon window, where he was sharing coffee with Doc Henley. They sat their horses with an easy confidence that spoke of violence, their eyes scanning the muddy street like predators. "Bounty hunters," Doc Henley muttered, his voice low. "Or worse." The lead rider was a lean man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes like chips of flint. His name, they would soon learn, was Fletcher Kane. He swung down from his horse with a fluid grace and approached Sheriff Murdoch, who had emerged from his office. "Morning, Sheriff," Kane said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "We're looking for survivors from that wagon train that got hit." "What's your interest in the matter?" Murdoch asked, his hand resting near his gun. "Tracking some stolen property," Kane replied, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "A bank was robbed down in Cheyenne. Word is the thieves might have joined up with that train." Jebediah's gut tightened. The story didn't sit right. The timeline was all wrong. That wagon train had been on the trail for weeks. "Only survivor was a young girl," the sheriff said carefully, "and she's in no state to be answering questions." "We won't cause her any distress," Kane purred. "Just need to know if she saw anything unusual. Maybe someone carrying a heavy leather satchel." Upstairs, Mercy stirred. Jebediah heard her footsteps. She'd been getting stronger, even coming down for meals. He met her at the top of the stairs. "Stay here with Doc," he told her. "Don't come down till I say it's safe." Her eyes widened. "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing," he lied. But when Jebediah stepped outside, he saw Kane's eyes flick up to the window where Mercy's silhouette was briefly visible. The man's gaze sharpened with a flicker of recognition that sent a chill down Jebediah's spine. "That her?" Kane asked, his voice casual, but his eyes were hard. "The survivor." "She's under my protection," Jebediah said, his voice a low rumble. Kane studied him, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face. "You're Jebediah Walsh. Heard about you down Texas way. Used to wear a badge yourself, didn't you?" The mention of his past was like a punch to the gut. Few people knew about that time, and even fewer knew why he'd torn the badge from his chest and ridden north. "Thing is, Walsh," Kane continued, his voice dropping, "we have reason to believe that little girl saw something important, something worth a considerable reward." Sheriff Murdoch stepped forward, his bulk casting a shadow over Kane. "Mr. Kane, I believe I made myself clear. The child is under the law's protection." "Of course, Sheriff," Kane said, tipping his hat with mock respect. "We'll just wait around town. Maybe she'll remember something useful." As Kane and his men rode toward the boarding house, Jebediah felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Something was terribly wrong. He went back upstairs. Mercy was sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching the silver locket so tightly her knuckles were white. "I know that man," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jebediah's blood ran cold. "The one with the gray beard?" She nodded. "He came to our camp 2 nights before the attack." "What did he want?" "He was asking Papa about—" She stopped, her face going pale. "I wasn't supposed to call him Papa. Mama said never to do that around strangers." The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture that made Jebediah's heart pound. "Mercy," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Who was the man you called Papa? What was his real name?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Black Pete Dalton." The name hit Jebediah like a runaway freight train. Black Pete Dalton, one of the most wanted men in 3 territories, a ruthless bank robber and killer. "He wasn't always bad," Mercy said quickly, as if she could read his thoughts. "Before Mama got sick, he tried to go straight. We had a little farm, but the medicine, it was so expensive." Jebediah understood. Desperation was a poison that could turn good men into monsters. "That man, Kane," she continued. "He came looking for Papa. Said people wanted their money back. Papa told him to leave, but I could see he was scared." "Where is your father now, Mercy?" "Dead," she said, the word flat and final. "The men who attacked our train, they weren't raiders, they were Papa's old gang. They said he cheated them, stole money that belonged to all of them. When he wouldn't tell them where it was hidden, they—" Her voice broke, and Jebediah pulled her into a hug as the story tumbled out in a flood of tears. He held her tight, his own ghosts whispering in his ear. And over her shoulder, he saw it. Sheriff Murdoch was tacking a wanted poster to the message board outside the saloon. The sketch was crude, but the eyes were unmistakable. They were the same haunting green eyes as the girl trembling in his arms. Wanted. Mercy Dalton, daughter of notorious outlaw Black Pete Dalton. $500 reward for information leading to her capture. Wanted for questioning in connection with multiple bank robberies and the murder of 3 lawmen. $500. It was a fortune. Enough to make an honest man do dishonest things. And Kane was no honest man. "They think I know where he hid the money," Mercy whispered against his chest. "But I don't, I swear." Sheriff Murdoch appeared in the doorway, the poster in his hand, his face a mask of grim reality. "Jeb," he said, his voice heavy. "We need to talk." Downstairs, the truth was laid bare. "She's wanted, Jeb," Murdoch said. "Not for any crime she committed, but that doesn't matter. The territorial marshal wants her for questioning." "And that bounty is blood money," Jebediah finished. "She's just a child, Tom." "Maybe," Murdoch sighed, sinking into a chair. "But try convincing a judge of that. I can hold Kane off for a day, maybe 2. But word will get out. Then we make sure it doesn't." "And how do you plan to do that?" Jebediah's mind raced. There was only one option, one impossible, dangerous choice. "We run," he said, his voice low and determined. "You'd make yourself a fugitive? Harboring a wanted person is a serious crime, Jeb." "I've been running from something my whole life, Tom," Jebediah said, a grim resolve settling in his heart. "Might as well run towards something for a change." The sheriff looked at him, a deep sadness in his eyes. "I can give you till dawn. But Jeb, those men. Kane has a reputation. If he thinks that girl knows where the money is, he will tear her apart to find out." Just then, Kane appeared in the saloon doorway, his cold eyes taking in the scene. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he said, his smile sharp as a razor. "Hope that young lady's feeling better. Hate to think of her suffering any more than she already has." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear as day. After Kane left, Jebediah climbed the stairs. Mercy was by the window, watching the street like a hunted animal. "We're leaving, aren't we?" she asked. "Tonight," he confirmed, "after the town's asleep." "Because of who I am." "Because some people think you're worth more as a prisoner than as a person," he said, sitting beside her. "And I aim to prove them wrong." She turned to him, and in her green eyes he saw the fire of her father's spirit. "Where will we go?" "West," he said. "As far as we need to." "And if they follow us?" Jebediah's smile was grim. "Then they'll learn why smart men don't corner a wounded wolf." They slipped out of Cedar Falls in the darkest hour before dawn. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the soft creak of the wagon wheels. Jebediah had packed enough supplies for 2 weeks: his rifle, his father's Bible, and the girl who had become his entire world. Mercy sat beside him on the driver's bench, bundled in one of his old coats. Her hair was tucked under a worn cap, her small frame hidden in a set of boys' clothes Doc Henley had given them. "A man and his nephew heading west to find work," Jebediah had explained. That's a common enough story. The disguise was good, but nothing could hide the sadness in her eyes. 20 miles out, as the sun began to rise, they stopped to rest the horses. Was my father really as bad as they say? Mercy asked, her voice small. Jebediah thought of his own past, of the dishonorable discharge papers hidden beneath a floorboard in the wagon. He thought of the good man he had tried to be, and the terrible mistakes he had made. Your father made choices, he said carefully. That doesn't make you responsible for them. Mama said he wasn't always like that, she whispered. Before she got sick, the medicine cost so much money, so he... She couldn't finish. He understood the terrible logic of a desperate man. He loved you, Jebediah said. That much is clear. Then why did they kill him? If he stole their money, why didn't he just give it back? Before he could answer, a sound echoed across the prairie. Hoofbeats. Distant, but getting closer. He had them in the wagon and moving in an instant, but he knew it was no use. A heavy farm wagon was no match for fast horses. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any kind of cover. 2 miles ahead, he saw it. A shallow creek bed winding between low ridges. A place to make a stand. Hold tight, he told Mercy as the wagon bumped down into the creek. He positioned them behind a cluster of boulders and checked his Winchester rifle. Stay in the wagon, he ordered. Don't make a sound. 15 minutes later, they appeared on the ridge above. 3 riders silhouetted against the morning sky. It was Kane and his men. Walsh! Kane's voice cut through the thin air. We know you're down there. No point in hiding. Jebediah weighed his options. Fight, negotiate, bluff. What do you want, Kane? He called back, his voice steady. Just the girl. Turn her over and you can ride away. Can't do that. Why not? She's not your blood. She's not even using her real name anymore. Kane knew about her name change. He'd been watching them more closely than he'd thought. She's my responsibility, Jebediah replied. Kane's laugh was sharp and cruel. Your protection, Walsh. I know all about your protection. Know what happened to the last people you were supposed to protect? The words hit him like a fist, dredging up the ghosts of Catherine and Hope. The guilt he'd carried for years threatened to choke him. This is different, he said, as much to himself as to Kane. Is it? Kane taunted. Looks like history repeating itself. You couldn't save your wife and daughter, and you won't save this one either. In the wagon, Mercy was still as a stone. She could hear every word. He looked back at her and saw something in her eyes that shocked him. Not fear. Determination. He's wrong, she whispered, her voice fierce. You're not the same man who lost them. Her faith in him was a terrifying, humbling thing. He had failed so badly before. But looking at this brave girl, he felt a strength he hadn't known in years. Last chance, Walsh, Kane yelled. Send her up, or we're coming down. Jebediah checked his rifle one last time. Keep your head down, he told Mercy. He stepped out from behind the rocks, his Winchester held ready. The sun was at his back, casting his face in shadow. Then come ahead, he called, his voice ringing with a cold authority that came from facing death before. But know this, the first man who moves against that child will be the last. The silence stretched, taut and heavy with the promise of violence. Then Kane laughed, but it was a nervous sound. You're outnumbered, Walsh. 3-1. I've had worse odds, Jebediah said, and it was true. Kane seemed to sense it. He hesitated, then wheeled his horse around. This isn't over, Walsh, he shouted as they rode away. We'll find you again, and next time we won't be so polite. As the hoofbeats faded, Mercy climbed out of the wagon. Will they come back? She asked. Yes, Jebediah said, his eyes on the horizon, but not today. What do we do? He looked down at the small girl who had placed all her trust in him, and the last of his own doubts fell away. "We keep moving," he said, "and we get you somewhere safe, no matter what it takes." For 3 days, they pushed westward, sticking to trails that were little more than whispers on the land. Kane and his men were out there, he knew, regrouping, planning. The threat of them was a constant shadow at their backs. One evening, as they camped beside a mountain stream, Jebediah saw the weight of it all on Mercy's face. She was always alert, always watching, never fully at ease. He took out his knife and a piece of oak from a broken wagon spoke he'd saved. As she tended the fire, he began to carve. "What are you making?" she asked, her voice soft. "Something I should have made for my daughter," he said, his hands moving with a steady, practiced rhythm. "But I never found the time." A horse began to take shape under his blade. "Every child should have a horse," he said, "even one made of wood." "You had a daughter?" He nodded, the memories rising, sharp and painful. Her name was Hope. She was 8, fearless as a wild cat. He smiled, then the smile faded. "She deserved better than what I gave her." "You tried to save her." "Not hard enough. I was away when the cholera hit, riding scout for the cavalry. By the time I got home..." He couldn't finish. The old guilt was a bitter taste in his mouth. "It wasn't your fault," Mercy said, her small hand resting on his arm. "A man's first duty is to his family," he said, his voice rough. "I failed." "My papa used to say the trick was learning to live with the hurt," she said wisely, "without letting it poison everything good that comes after." As darkness fell, he finished the carving. It was rough, but it was a horse, full of life and imagined speed. He handed it to her. Her face lit up with the first genuine smile he had ever seen from her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "A good horse needs a name," he said. She thought for a moment. "Thunder," she decided, "because he looks like he could outrun the wind." Just then, a new sound broke the quiet of the night. Not the urgent rhythm of pursuit, but the steady plodding of a heavy wagon. Jebediah quickly banked the fire and moved into the shadows. A covered wagon emerged, drawn by 2 oxen, a woman with silver hair holding the reins. She was alone. "Hello, the camp!" she called, her voice clear and strong. "Name's Martha Keene. Wondering if you might spare a cup of coffee for a weary traveler." Jebediah studied her. She seemed to be in her 60s, with a straight-backed posture that spoke of strength and self-reliance. She didn't look like trouble. "Come ahead, ma'am," he called back. Martha Keene was a widow, heading to Oregon to live with her son's family. She accepted their story of being an uncle and nephew without question, but he saw the way her keen, kind eyes rested on Mercy. There was a maternal warmth about her that seemed to draw the girl in. Later that evening, as Jebediah checked the horses, he heard them talking. "Your uncle's a good man," Martha was saying. "He saved my life," Mercy replied. When he returned to the fire, Mercy was curled up against Martha's side, fast asleep. The sight stirred something in his chest, a painful recognition of all the things he couldn't give her. "Ma'am," he said carefully, Would you consider taking Mercy with you to Oregon? I'd pay for her passage." "No!" Mercy sat up, her eyes wide with alarm. "I won't leave you. We're supposed to stay together." Martha looked between them, her gaze full of a wisdom earned over a long life. "Seems to me this young lady has made her choice," she said gently. "And looks to me like you need her just as much as she needs you." After Martha had gone to her wagon, Mercy sat beside him, clutching the wooden horse. "She's nice," Mercy said. "She is. She could give you things I can't. A proper home. Safety." "I don't want safety without you," she said, her voice firm. "You're my family now. The only one I have left." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. You sure about that, child? Once we leave here, there's no going back. We'll be running for a long time. Then we'll run together, she said, looking up at him with those startling green eyes. Unless you don't want me anymore. He had to clear his throat before he could speak. Child, you're the best thing that's happened to me in 10 years. I need to be sure you know what you're choosing. I understand, she said. I'm choosing you. A coyote howled in the distance. He looked at the girl leaning against his shoulder, already half asleep, and felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known since his daughter died. They had a long, dangerous road ahead. Cain was still out there. But tonight, in the quiet of the mountains, with a trusting child at his side and a wooden horse gleaming in the firelight, Jebediah Walsh felt something he had long forgotten. Peace. And for a man running from his own personal hell, sometimes peace was enough. They parted ways with Martha Keene at sunrise, her wagon heading northwest while they turned due west, deeper into the mountains. The terrain became too rough for their wagon, so they traded it and their remaining supplies to Martha for 2 sturdy pack horses. Now, everything they owned fit into 4 saddlebags. They were traveling light, moving fast, gaining precious ground on their pursuers. They made camp in a secluded canyon, a fortress of stone carved by an ancient river. As Mercy was sorting through her few belongings, her fingers found something hidden in the hem of her tattered dress. A small, hard object, wrapped in oiled cloth. Jeb, she called, her voice strange. I found something. She was holding a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Her hands were trembling. It was hidden in my dress. Mama must have sewn it there. Jebediah took the letter. The handwriting was rough, but the words were clear, and the first line made his blood run cold. My dear Elizabeth, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone. It was from Black Pete Dalton, a final letter to his wife. He confessed everything. He'd robbed the bank in Cheyenne, not for greed, but to buy medicine for his dying wife. The robbery had yielded a fortune, nearly $8,000, but he had been betrayed by his own gang before he could get the money to her. I buried the gold, the letter continued, beneath the lightning-struck pine on Devil's Ridge. Find the oak tree with our initials carved in the bark. Take the money, Elizabeth. Take our daughter and start over, somewhere far from the shadow of what I've done. The last paragraph explained Cain's relentless pursuit. There are men who will come for this money. They believe it belongs to them. If they find you, run. Take our girl and run as far as you can. Mercy had watched his face as he read. He really did love us, she whispered. He was trying to protect us. Yes, he was, Jebediah said, folding the letter. The question was, what did they do now? The money, Mercy breathed. Is it really there? Probably. Your father was a practical man. $8,000. It was enough to disappear. Enough to buy a new life, a safe life, somewhere Cain could never find them. But retrieving it meant heading back towards danger. That money has blood on it, Jebediah said gently. But Papa said it was for Mama's medicine, she argued. I believe him. But good intentions don't change the facts. They sat in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Then Mercy said something that stunned him. What if we used it to help people? Other children, who lost their families like I did. The moral clarity of it, coming from a 12-year-old girl who had lost everything, took his breath away. To turn her father's violent legacy into one of compassion. It was a noble, beautiful thought. But first, he said, we'd have to get it, and that country is full of wolves. Before he could say more, the sound of horses echoed off the canyon walls. 3 riders, moving with the quiet precision of hunters closing in on their prey. Cain had found them again. Into the rocks! Jebediah hissed, grabbing his rifle. They scrambled up the slope just as Cain and his men rode into their abandoned camp. Still warm, Cain called to his men. They can't be far. What followed was a tense game of cat and mouse among the boulders. Kane's men moved up the slope, their voices echoing in the canyon. "We know you're up there, Walsh," Kane shouted. "And we know about the letter. Saw the girl reading it before you spotted us." Jebediah's heart hammered in his chest. If Kane knew about the gold, the stakes had just become life and death. "We had a long talk with Black Pete before he died." Kane's voice grew closer, laced with cruel satisfaction. A real educational talk. He was surprisingly chatty once we explained the situation properly. Beside him, Mercy stiffened with rage and grief. Jebediah put a hand on her shoulder, warning her to stay quiet. "Point is," Kane continued, "we know where that gold is, and we know the girl's the only one with the legal right to claim it. Her, and whoever happens to be her legal guardian. Funny how the law works." The plan was clear. Force Mercy to get the gold, then kill them both. "Final offer, Walsh," Kane yelled. "Send the girl down, and I'll let you ride away." Mercy's small hand found his. Her fingers were trembling, but her grip was firm. "Whatever happens," she whispered fiercely, "we stay together." The sun began to set, painting the canyon in shades of blood and fire. Jebediah made his choice. "Kane," he called out, "I've got a counter-proposal." "I'm listening." "You want the gold. We want to be left alone. We'll retrieve it, on our terms. You follow us at a distance. When we have it, we'll negotiate a split." "What's to stop me from just taking it all once you dig it up?" "The fact that you need us alive," Jebediah bluffed. There was a long silence. Then Kane's voice, cold and final. "Interesting proposition, but I think I'll stick with my original plan." The gunfire erupted instantly. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. But Jebediah had been expecting it. As Kane's men focused on their position, he had been studying the sky. Storm clouds were gathering over the peaks. "When I give the word," he whispered to Mercy, "we run for that narrow passage. We need to get to higher ground." Thunder rumbled overhead. The first fat drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it was a downpour. The canyon floor began to flood. And then the wall of water came roaring down the canyon. Kane and his men were caught by surprise, scrambling for their lives. But Jebediah and Mercy were already climbing, moving through the rain-slicked rocks toward safety. The flash flood had bought them time. It had saved their lives. But it had also washed away their horses, their supplies, and everything they had left in the world. As they climbed, Mercy clutched her father's letter in one hand and the little wooden horse in the other. The storm passed by morning. The flood had scoured the canyon clean, taking their camp with it. Kane and his men were gone, but Jebediah knew they would be back. They had lost their horses and most of their supplies. All they managed to salvage was some jerky, their water canteens, and, miraculously, Jebediah's rifle. As they worked, Mercy was unusually quiet. Then, she opened her palm. Lying there was a simple gold wedding band. "It was Mama's," she said softly. "I found it sewn into my dress, next to Papa's letter." Inside the band were two sets of initials, EM and PD. Elizabeth Morrison and Pete Dalton. "Papa spent 3 months' wages on this ring," Mercy whispered. "He wanted her to have something beautiful that would last forever." She held the ring, the weight of her parents' love, her father's mistakes, and her own uncertain future resting in her small hand. "What if we used the gold to honor what they really wanted?" she asked, her voice filled with a strength that humbled him. "To give me a good life. By giving other children a good life, too." The sheer courage of it, the profound goodness, settled the matter in Jebediah's heart. They would go for the gold. Not for themselves, but for something better. "It will mean going back toward danger," he warned. "Kane will be watching." "But you know this country better than he does," she countered. "We can find a way." She was right. But it was a desperate gamble. A 1,000-mile journey to California, hunted every step of the way. California is a long way, he said. Martha told me about it, Mercy said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. A place where people can start over. It was foolish. It was dangerous. It was probably impossible. It's possible, he heard himself say. Before he could take it back, the sound of distant gunfire echoed across the canyon. 3 shots, a signal. Kane had regrouped, and he was closer than they thought. We need to move, Jebediah said, checking his rifle. As they started the treacherous climb out of the canyon, Mercy slipped her mother's ring onto her finger. It was far too big, so she wrapped a strip of cloth around it to keep it secure. For luck, she said. The journey ahead felt like madness. A broken man and an orphaned girl, on a quest for a dead outlaw's treasure, hunted by killers. But for the first time in 15 years, it felt like purpose. Jeb, Mercy said, her voice breathless from the climb. If something happens, I want you to know that these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Nothing is going to happen to you, he said fiercely. I won't let it. I know, she said. But if it does, promise me you'll go on. Promise you won't give up. The request hit him like a physical blow. To promise to survive if he failed her, just as he had failed Catherine and Hope. He looked into her wise old eyes and saw that she was offering him a gift. Forgiveness for the past and permission to live in the future. I promise, he said quietly. But you have to promise me something too. Promise me you'll fight. No matter what, you never give up. I promise, she said, and they shook on it. As they reached the canyon rim, the vast wilderness stretching before them, Jebediah felt the weight of his past shift. It was still there, but it was no longer an anchor dragging him down. It was ballast, keeping him steady. Devil's Ridge is 2 days north, he said. After we get the gold, we head west, toward the setting sun. Mercy smiled, her hand on the wooden horse in her pocket. Thunder and I are ready for an adventure. Despite it all, Jebediah found himself smiling back. Then let's go find your father's treasure, he said, and turn it into something he'd be proud of. Behind them, in the darkness, Kane was following. Ahead lay 1,000 miles of danger. But for the first time in a very long time, Jebediah Walsh was running towards something, instead of away from it. And that made all the difference. They traveled by moonlight, moving like ghosts through the high country. On the second night, they reached Devil's Ridge. A massive, lightning-scarred pine stood like a lonely sentinel against the stars, just as Black Pete's letter had described. Nearby was a gnarled oak tree. Carved into its bark, weathered but still clear, was a heart enclosing the initials EM plus PD. This was the place. They worked in the cold, thin air, taking turns with a small shovel. After an hour, the shovel struck something solid with a metallic clang. They cleared away the dirt to reveal a sturdy metal strongbox. The lock was broken, but it was heavy. It was real. As Jebediah reached to open it, a voice drifted up from the darkness below. They're here somewhere, came the familiar, chilling voice of Kane. Found fresh sign. Can't be more than an hour ahead of us. They'd been outmaneuvered. We need to move, Jebediah whispered. But before they could, another voice rang out, a voice that froze the blood in his veins. Evening, Walsh. Been a long time. A man stepped into the moonlight. Tall, lean, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a man used to authority. He wore a territorial marshal's badge on his chest. And Jebediah knew him. Colt Rivers, Jebediah said, his own voice sounding distant and strange. Marshal Rivers now, the man corrected with a cold smile. I've been looking forward to this. Mercy looked from Jebediah to the marshal, her eyes wide with alarm. She could feel the dangerous history radiating between the two men. What do you want, Colt? What I've always wanted, Rivers said, his voice like the crack of a whip. Justice, for what you did in Millerville. Millerville. The name was a thunderclap, a nightmare Jebediah had spent 15 years trying to outrun. The dusty Texas town where he'd worn a sheriff's badge. The place where his life had shattered. Go ahead, Walsh, Rivers sneered. Tell the girl who you really are. Tell her about the innocent man you gunned down in cold blood. It wasn't like that, Jebediah choked out, but the words were weak. Wasn't it? Rivers pressed on, his voice relentless. I remember it clearly. March 15th, 1873. You shot an unarmed man in the back. Claimed he was reaching for a weapon that was never found. From behind the tree, Mercy made a small, wounded sound. The man's name was Daniel Morrison, Rivers said, his eyes boring into Mercy. Ring any bells, little girl? Morrison was your grandfather. The world stopped. Mercy stepped out from behind the tree, her face as pale as the moon, her eyes a vortex of shock and betrayal. You killed my grandfather? She whispered, her voice shattering like glass. Mercy, it's complicated. He was a territorial investigator, Rivers explained with savage satisfaction. Sent to look into corruption in your friend's department. Walsh here was one of the men under investigation. That's not true, Jebediah cried. I was trying to protect him. I was there that night, Rivers said coldly. I saw you shoot an unarmed man. The truth was a tangled, bloody mess. But all Mercy could hear, all she could see, was the man she trusted, the man who had become her father, standing before her as her grandfather's killer. It was a mistake, Jebediah pleaded, his voice breaking. I thought he was reaching for a gun. It was dark. By the time I realized, your mistake. Mercy's voice was small and broken. My grandfather died because of your mistake. Jebediah looked at the girl who had given him a reason to live, and saw his own damnation reflected in her eyes. Yes, he said, the word tasting like ash. I've carried that guilt every day since. And now, Rivers said, pulling back the hammer on his revolver, you're going to pay for it. But Mercy stepped between them. She still clutched the strongbox, her small frame trembling, but her voice was surprisingly steady. Wait, she said, looking directly at the marshal. My grandfather. He was a good man, an honest man. The best I ever knew, Rivers confirmed. Then he wouldn't want his death to cause more killing, she said. He'd want justice, not revenge. Rivers hesitated, thrown off balance by this child's impossible courage. Jeb has spent 15 years trying to make up for his mistake, she continued, her voice gaining strength. He saved my life. He protected me. Maybe that doesn't balance the scales, but it means something. She looked at Jebediah, and he saw not forgiveness, but something even more profound. Understanding. I'm angry, she said to him, her voice thick with pain. And I don't know if I can trust you like I did. But I also know. The man who carved me a wooden horse is not the same man who made that mistake. She turned back to Rivers, holding the strongbox like a shield. This money is my father's legacy, and I choose to use it to honor my grandfather's memory, by helping people, not by funding more violence. Rivers stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he lowered his gun. Your grandfather would be proud of you, he said quietly. Then help us, she pleaded. Help us get to California. The marshal looked from the haunted man to the brave girl, weighing 15 years of vengeance against a child's plea for redemption. 3 days, he said finally. I'll give you a 3-day head start. After that, you're on your own. As Rivers melted back into the darkness, Mercy sank to the ground, the strength leaving her in a rush. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, not looking at him. I was afraid, he admitted, his voice raw. Afraid you'd look at me the way you're looking at me now. How am I looking at you? Like someone who's not sure if they can trust me anymore. She finally looked up, and he saw the agony in her eyes. You're right. I'm not sure. But I'm willing to find out. Because the man who killed my grandfather might have been weak and frightened. But the man who saved me is strong and brave. And I think I'd rather know the strong man. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a chance. As they prepared to leave with the outlaw's treasure, Jebediah realized that Mercy had given him something far more valuable than gold. She had given him the opportunity to finally become the man he was always meant to be. The 3-day head start passed in a blur of hard riding. The $8,000 in their saddlebags was a heavy burden, not just in weight, but in the shadows it cast. The revelation on Devil's Ridge had created a chasm between Jebediah and Mercy. She rode beside him, but the easy trust was gone, replaced by a careful, painful distance. On the third evening, camped just 40 miles from the California border, he knew he had to break the silence. We need to talk, he said. She looked up from the fire, her green eyes guarded. About what? About the fact that you're planning to get to California and start that orphanage without any help from the man who killed your grandfather. Her expression softened. Are you planning to leave me? No, he said, the word coming out rougher than he intended. I promised I'd protect you. Then why does it matter what I think about your past? Because it matters to me, he burst out. Because you're the closest thing to family I have, and the idea that you might hate me. I don't hate you, she interrupted quietly. I'm just trying to understand. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small, tarnished compass. This was my father's, he said, his voice thick. He gave it to me when I left for the army, told me it would help me find my true direction. Mercy took it. The glass face was cracked. Did it work? She asked. For a while. Then I lost my way. That crack happened the night I shot your grandfather. I threw it against a wall. I've been carrying a broken compass ever since. She traced the crack with her finger. Maybe it's not broken, she said softly. Maybe it just needs to be recalibrated. Papa used to say a man who loses his way needs to remember why he started the journey in the first place. She handed it back. Why did you become a lawman, Jeb? To protect people, he answered without hesitation. To make sure children could grow up safe. And what are you doing now? The simple question was a revelation. Despite it all, his purpose had never changed. I'm trying to get a little girl to safety, he said, his voice full of wonder, so she can help other children. Then maybe your compass isn't broken after all, she whispered. Before he could answer, the sound of horses shattered the quiet. At least 6 riders moving fast, closing in. He was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand, pushing Mercy behind the rocks. They emerged from the trees. At the lead was Kane. But he had reinforcements, hard-faced men who looked like professional killers, and beside him rode a man with the same piercing green eyes as Mercy. Hello, niece, the man called out, his voice a cruel parody of a family greeting. Time to come home. It was Ezra Dalton, Black Pete's younger brother. I don't know you, Mercy said, her voice trembling. Of course you don't. Your daddy tried to go straight. But Dalton blood runs toward easy money. She's not going with you, Jebediah growled. That's not your decision to make, Ezra sneered. The girl's got family now. Kane held up a piece of paper, an official-looking document. Custody order, he said with a triumphant smile. Signed by a federal judge. Ezra Dalton is her legal guardian. It might be a forgery, but it was enough. The money comes with her, Ezra continued. Dalton money. We've got plans for that gold. Over my dead body, Jebediah said. That can be arranged, Kane replied, his hand moving to his gun. Turns out killing a federal investigator carries a hefty reward, even after 15 years. They were trapped, 6 guns against 1. It was a death sentence. But then Mercy stepped out from behind the rocks. She was holding the strongbox. "Wait!" she called out, her voice ringing with an authority that belied her age. "Mercy, get back!" "No, Jeb. This is my choice to make." She looked directly at her uncle. "You say you're my family, but what kind of family kills children for money?" "Smart children don't get killed," Ezra snarled. "I've seen enough killing," she said, her voice filled with a weary strength. She hefted the heavy box. "This money cost my father his soul, and my mother her life. It cost my grandfather his justice. I won't let it cost anyone else anything." "Mercy, don't!" But she was already moving, walking toward the edge of the valley, where a steep cliff dropped to a rushing river hundreds of feet below. "You want Dalton money?" she cried out to her uncle. "You want my father's legacy? Then go get it!" With all her might, she hurled the strongbox over the edge. It tumbled through the air, scattering a rain of gold coins that glittered like fallen stars in the firelight before vanishing into the churning water below. Silence. $8,000. Gone. "You little fool!" Ezra screamed, spurring his horse forward. "I've just made sure my father's blood money can't hurt anyone else," Mercy replied, standing at the cliff's edge, her chin high. "And I've made sure you have no reason to follow us anymore." Kane was already drawing his gun, his face a mask of pure rage. "Wrong, little girl," he hissed. "Now we have every reason to make you pay." The first shot cracked through the valley. Jebediah dove, tackling Mercy, as the world exploded in gunfire. The final battle had begun, and this time there would be no escape. The fallen log was poor cover, but it was all they had. Bullets splintered the wood, kicking up dirt all around them. Kane's men were closing in, moving with the practiced coordination of wolves. This wasn't about a bounty anymore. This was an execution. "Mercy," Jebediah said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm going to draw their fire. When I do, you crawl along that dry creek bed. Get to those boulders. Don't look back. Just go." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." He lied. But before he could act, one of Kane's men got impatient. He broke cover, rushing their position. Jebediah's Colt Peacemaker was in his hand in a flash. The revolver was an old friend, an extension of his own will. One shot, center mass. The man went down. "Now! Mercy! Move!" She scrambled toward the creek bed. But instead of providing cover fire, Jebediah did the last thing they expected. He vaulted over the log and charged. It was madness, a frontal assault against 5 guns, a suicide run. But sometimes, insanity is the only sane option. His second shot took down the nervous young gunman from Cedar Falls. His third forced another man to dive for cover. A bullet burned a groove across his shoulder. But he didn't stop. He kept moving, kept shooting. Stopping meant Mercy would be left alone with these killers. His fourth shot took another man in the leg. That left 3. Kane, Ezra, and one other. "You're finished, Walsh!" Kane shouted. "You're bleeding, you're outnumbered, and you're down to 1 shot." He was right, 1 bullet left. But Mercy was almost to the boulders. She just needed a few more seconds. Kane stepped out from behind his cover, confident, his gun trained on Jebediah's chest. Ezra emerged beside him. 1 shot, 2 targets. Time seemed to slow. In the space between heartbeats, Jebediah made his choice. He aimed not for Ezra, the man who shared Mercy's blood, but for the cold-hearted killer who had orchestrated it all. He fired. The bullet took Kane in the chest. The bounty hunter staggered, his chase finally over. But Ezra's gun was already swinging toward Jebediah. There was no time to reload, no cover. This was the end. He braced for the impact. But instead of Ezra's gunshot, he heard the sharp crack of a rifle. It came from the boulder field. Ezra screamed, his shot going wide as a red stain spread across his arm. "Mercy, no!" Jebediah yelled, realizing she must have found a rifle from one of the fallen men. She worked the action, her small frame braced against a rock. As Ezra tried to switch his gun to his good hand, a second shot rang out. It hit him in the chest. Black Pete's brother fell in the dirt beside Cain. Silence descended on the valley, broken only by the ringing in Jebediah's ears. "Jeb." Mercy's voice was a small, shaken whisper. He walked to her, gently taking the rifle from her trembling hands. She was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "I killed him," she whispered. "My own uncle." "You saved my life," he said, pulling her into his arms. "And your own." "But he was family." "Not all family deserves saving," he said, holding her tight. Among the debris of the fight, the little wooden horse lay in the dirt. One of its legs had been splintered by a bullet. Mercy pulled away from him and picked it up. "He's hurt," she said, her voice catching, "but not broken." "We can fix him," Jebediah said. She looked from the scarred toy to his bleeding shoulder. "Like you," she said. He looked at this incredible girl who had survived a massacre, faced down killers, and just fought a battle no child should ever have to fight. "Like all of us," he said quietly. As dawn broke, they prepared to leave. The blood money was gone, washed away in a mountain river. And somehow, that felt like a victory. "What do we do now?" Mercy asked. "Now," he said, "we keep going west. We find a place where the past can't follow us, and we build something new. But without the money." "Money isn't the only thing of value," he said, touching the wooden horse in her pocket. "Sometimes the most precious things can't be bought or sold." They rode out of that valley of death, leaving the ghosts behind. The trail ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they were riding towards a home, not just away from a grave. "Jeb," Mercy said as they rode, "when we get to California, do you think we could still help other children? You know how to teach things, and I know what it's like to lose everything." The idea was so pure, so beautiful, it brought tears to his eyes. Not a grand home funded by stolen gold, but something smaller, more real. A home built on shared loss and a shared commitment to healing. "I think," he said carefully, "that sounds like exactly the kind of life your mother and father would have wanted for you." "And your daughter?" she asked. "Would Hope approve?" "I think Hope would love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I think she'd be proud that her old papa finally learned how to be the man she always believed he could be." Ahead, California waited like a promise. The compass in his pocket pointed west, its cracked face a reminder that the most reliable instruments are the ones that have been tested, scarred, and proven true. 6 months later, they stood on the porch of a small ranch house, the Pacific Ocean glimmering in the distance. They had 20 acres of good land, bought with honest work. It wasn't a fortune, but it was theirs. From the barn, Mercy's voice, bright with excitement. "Jeb, come see!" Their mare had given birth to a foal during the night. "What should we name him?" she asked, her eyes shining with a joy he had once thought was lost forever. "He's your horse," Jebediah said. "Thunder's son should have a strong name," she decided. "Something that means new beginnings. What about Dawn?" As they watched the foal take its first wobbly steps, Jebediah marveled at how normal, how right, it all felt. This was home. A wagon approached. It was Doc Patterson from the nearby town, but he wasn't alone. In the back were 2 small children, a boy and a girl, their eyes wide and scared. They were orphans, their parents taken by fever. Mrs. Mills, from the Territorial Children's Aid Society, explained that Mercy had been writing to them, offering their small ranch as a refuge for children in need. He looked at Mercy, his heart swelling with pride. "They need a place to heal," Mercy said. "To remember what family feels like. We can provide that." And just like that, their family grew from 2 to 4. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from Marshal Colt Rivers. "Mr. Walsh," it began. "I hope this finds you well. The investigation into the Dalton gang is concluded. All outstanding warrants have been resolved. As far as the law is concerned, you and Miss Mercy are free. I have also taken the liberty of recommending your ranch to the California government as an ideal location for a permanent children's aid facility. Your grandfather, Miss Mercy, would be proud of the woman you are becoming. You have chosen to honor his memory in the best possible way." As autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, their ranch became a home for the lost, a family chosen not by blood, but by a shared commitment to healing. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Mercy touched the gold ring on her finger. "Do you think they're proud of us?" she asked. "Mama and Papa? Hope and Grandfather?" Jebediah pulled out his father's compass. The needle pointed west, toward the endless ocean. But he knew his true direction now. It wasn't on any map. It was about choosing light over darkness. "I think," he said, "they're the reason we found each other. All of them, in their own way, led us to this place, to home." The wooden horse sat on Mercy's shelf, its mended scars a testament to everything they had survived. A reminder that love endures, that hope survives, and that sometimes the most broken people can build the most beautiful families. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next.